After the United States and Israel recklessly assassinated a foreign head of state, our Prime Minister was quick to condemn the action.
I condemn Iran's attacks today on partners across the region, many of which are not parties to this conflict.
So Israel and America kill the leader of a sovereign nation, and you condemn the attack. You condemn the attacks by Iran. So they were the ones who were attacked. They then launched retaliatory attacks against Israel and other countries that house American air bases. I don't endorse or condemn those attacks, but it's not exactly surprising that if a state is attacked to the extent that their head of state is assassinated, that they might retaliate, maybe condemn the thing that started this, right? And in terms of, they're completely unrelated, these countries. How do we think the US would respond if the Chinese had assassinated an American president from a base in Mexico, right? Would the Mexicans get off scot-free? I don't necessarily see that, right? That clip was from Saturday. This was Starmer on Sunday.
Yesterday, Iran hit a military base in Bahrain, narrowly missing British personnel. The death of the supreme leader will not stop Iran from launching these strikes. Their approach is becoming even more reckless and more dangerous to civilians.
The death of the supreme leader will not stop Iran from launching these strikes, right? It was the assassination of the supreme leader, which is why they're launching these strikes, right? The strikes weren't to stop Iran retaliate. That's why this is happening, right? They didn't just willy-nilly decide to bomb all their neighbors. He's also said, right, they bombed a military base, right? They bombed a military base, which was really close to our military base, by the way. Why have we even got a military base? How dare they bomb a military base close to our military base? Oh, now we're going to have to attack them. These are bases which were used to kill their leader. Again, I'm not saying I support the retaliatory attacks. I certainly don't support the Ayatollah Khamenei. But this just seems like a completely bizarre way of talking about what happened over the weekend. Right? There was two countries, the United States and Israel, which were negotiating with Iran in the middle of negotiations, where, by all accounts, the Iranians were willing to, make some real concessions. In the middle of those negotiations, the Israelis and the Americans bombed the country they're negotiating with, killed their head of state. Now the Iranians are retaliating against various American bases in the region and Israel, who just killed their head of state. And now suddenly we're saying, I condemn what Iran is doing. How irresponsible. Starmer was reading from an autocue there. Even when he's talking about war, I still feel like I might nod off when I'm listening. Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper, though, freestyled on Monday morning. She sounded a bit more emotional. And she was positively outraged, in fact, that Iran had dared to respond to being attacked.
It has been just truly appalling, the way in which the Iranian regime, a regime which we know has brutally killed tens of thousands of its own people and has now been targeting with these missiles and drones countries that were not involved in striking Iran, but they have been targeted now by the Iranian regime. It is a significant sign of quite how dangerous this Iranian regime is, and we would continually urge the Iranian regime to stop these strikes on our partner countries in the region so that people who had nothing to do with any of this, British citizens, can be returned safely home.
Nothing to do with it? How dare they attack our partner countries in the region? Well, your partner countries in the region have the US military bases that were used to attack their country. Right. Also, the idea that them retaliate, I think there are signs. You could easily find some signs that suggest that Iran might be dangerous in some ways, right? They do fund groups in different countries who do very controversial things, right? You might also say that the nuclear program is, to some degree, a threat, right? That's a reasonable thing to say. But to say that them getting bombed and then them doing some retaliatory drone strikes in response shows quite how dangerous they are. This is like any country in the world, if their head of state was taken out by a sort of out of the blue military attack, they're going to respond. The fact that you've retaliated doesn't show that you're unreasonably extreme. That's just the most normal thing to do in the world for any state in the world. So that was the UK government refusing to call out the actual aggressor in the war on Iran, not the war by Iran, the war on Iran. Now, you might expect that, right? Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper, they've been fairly unwilling to stand up to Trump. But what about the guy we thought was the new leader of the free world, Canada's Mark Carney? Of course, it was Carney who spoke so powerfully at Davos about Trump ripping up the rules-based order. And these were the words he said in that speech. He said the middle powers should, quote, build a new order that encompasses our values, such as respect for human rights, solidarity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of states, right? Sovereignty, territorial integrity of states. So surely this is the kind of guy, he wants a world where we're more honest. He wants a world where we respect nations' borders. Surely he'd have something to say about Israel and the United States assassinating the head of state of a sovereign country.
We reaffirm Israel's right to defend itself. Canada supports the United States acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent its regime from further threatening international peace and security.
Israel wasn't defending itself. Israel bombed a foreign country and took out their sovereign leader because they want a greater Israel. And they don't want any sort of alternative power in the region who might be able to stop them having a greater Israel. Again, this is not to say that the Islamic Republic of Iran is a brilliant place, right? This is not to say that all of their foreign policy decisions are brilliant. I don't think they're this sort of bastion of justice. But to pretend that bombing Iran was an act of self-defense it's nonsense, and he knows it's nonsense, right? So it turns out sovereignty, international law only matter when it comes to Greenland. So when it came to Greenland, when Canada was going to have some, not sanctions, some tariffs imposed on it, suddenly we need a whole new world order. Now that the US and Israel have taken out a head of state in an act of aggression, oh, no, that seems fine. That seems cool, actually. None of this, though, was quite as blatant in terms of gaslighting as US Secretary of War. They did rename the department. I suppose that's the only thing they've done which isn't gaslighting. They have been quite honest about what used to be the Department of Defense. It's now the Department of War, which is what it is. This was Pete Hegseth speaking at the Pentagon today.
We didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we are finishing it. Their war on Americans has become our retribution against their Ayatollah and his death cult.
Now, there were two lies there, because they did start the war and they have no idea how to finish it. We didn't start it, but we're going to finish it. You started it. How are you going to finish it? Right? You've taken out a head of state. You have absolutely no plan what to do whatsoever. So you're lying about what you've done in the past. You're lying or mistaken about what you're going to do in the future. Like gaslighting on both levels. Someone who was, for once, a little more honest, didn't think I was ever going to say this, about what's going on, was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
אנחנו במערכה שבה אנחנו מביאים את כל כוחו של צה"ל כפי שלא היה מעולם למערכה הזאת כדי להבטיח את קיומנו ועתידנו. אבל אנחנו מביאים למערכה הזאת גם את סיועה של ארצות הברית, את ידידי נשיא ארצות הברית דונלד טראמפ, את צבא ארצות הברית, ושילוב הכוחות הזה מאפשר לנו לעשות את מה שאני מייחל לעשות כבר 40 שנה.
If you're listening on the podcast, what Netanyahu said there is that having the US on side in the fight against Iran is allowing him to do exactly what he's wanted to do for 40 years. So, if you're listening to all of these other Western leaders, they're saying, oh, this is very bad. The Americans had no choice but to act because Iran is so irresponsible. They were really forced into this. Netanyahu's saying, mate, I've wanted to do this for 40 years. I've just been waiting for an excuse to get the Americans on board. That's what's happening. Kieran, I remember I was watching, obviously, live BBC News this weekend, and when the statement first, so you're watching it, you've just sort of got up in the morning, you found out that they've assassinated Ayatollah Khamenei, and then the newsreader is reading out, she said, oh, we've got our first statement from the UK, France, and Germany, I think it was. She reads it out. Okay, so the UK, France, and Germany say they condemn the attacks by Iran. On, I don't know who they'd bombed by then at that point, but the retaliatory strikes. I mean, it does make you feel a little bit crazy watching it.
It makes you feel completely insane. They're all of them speaking very fluently in tongues. It has no correlation with the real world for the reasons that you've outlined, Michael. I think that I'm trying to work out the most analytic way of saying this, but we really need to stop, based on the evidence, to stop thinking of Britain and Europe as having an independent foreign policy. It is so obvious that all of the leaders of Europe don't have foreign policy brains. And I don't just mean that in the sense that they don't have the training. It's that they don't see that the material conditions permit for them to do anything other than the Americans want them to do. And by extension, the Israelis want them to do. So their brains, foreign policy brains in a sense, are in vats in Washington. And that's the extent of it. But there are many, I mean, even if you leave aside the legalistic and the moral sides of all of this, which we've talked about and Elle talked about, there are very good domestic, self-interested reasons as to why this is completely absurd and very dangerous. And it's not just military personnel being put in the line of fire. It's also that this war will quite possibly, has the potential at least, to create the worst refugee crisis in human history. That's not hyperbole. Country of 92 million people. We don't know where this is going to end up. It's certainly going to endanger us more. It has the potential to increase domestic terrorism, possibly. And it's also going to have probably going to have an impact on household bills. So you've got all these tribunes of the people, like Nigel Farage and Reform and so on, throwing their lot behind the war and cheerleading it on. But actually, in very real terms, what will this do? We should be asking, the leaders ought to be asking, Starmer ought to be asking, what will the material impacts for people in this country be? And the material impacts for people in this country will be as I outlined. And yet, because there is no foreign policy in Europe, because we've allowed ourselves to become a multi-state vassalage of the United States, it doesn't matter that it's detrimental to our own citizens that this play out. We are still willing to bend over or go against the interests of our own citizens and join the US and Israel in what has the potential to be an extremely catastrophic, protracted war.
And then they say, well, we have to do it because all of our interests in the Middle East are tied up with American bases, because all the UK bases, and Ben Judah, who was like a former advisor to David Lammy when he was Foreign Secretary, was talking about this on the weekend. He's saying when you realise that all the military bases in the region are just appendages, a little sign on an American base which says this is now British territory. Right. He says you realise, why we are kind of stuck with the Americans, because all of our global reach is dependent on, acquiescence to their leadership. But it's like, why do we need the base in Bahrain? Like, if it's going to create another refugee crisis, which is going to upend our politics, if it's going to make, our energy much more expensive, maybe the base in Bahrain is not worth it. Yeah. Like maybe we'll just say, actually, we don't want to be a part of this anymore.
No, totally. And it's a path dependency that overarches two things, Michael, I think. One, the historic military relationship with the United States and the sense that we need the United States. And two, the kind of institutional interests that build up around that that kind of that series of interests, crystallizes, exactly. And so I think that like you say, we would be much better advised to reverse on it. And I'm not saying that could happen immediately, but there are ways to slowly disentangle yourself from a military industrial complex, which, as you rightly say, involves having bases for reasons that are not entirely clear to me.
To protect influences in Dubai.
Influences in Dubai, but we're seeing people saying they're going to leave Dubai in their droves now, right? The whole region is under threat. Now, I don't care about Dubai, if I'm honest. I don't want anybody to get killed, obviously. I don't care about flight.
Good people moved there so they didn't have to pay their taxes.
Exactly.
How could you be so callous?
So I don't care about flight from Dubai or the Gulf states.
Isabel Oakeshott has made a whole life there.
Well, she's welcome to stay there.
Yeah. Now, obviously, as you say, I feel sympathy for anyone who's found themselves in a war zone, right? I don't want anyone to get hurt. But the idea that, the way Keir Starmer talks, we have hundreds of thousands of people living in the region. Of course, we need to attack Iranian missile sites. I don't get it.